everyone. We have with us Dhruv Bhat. He's incredible, Dhruva Bhat. He's an incredible debater, a coach, as well as the topic for today is primarily reading and research and debating. And I see no, other person as compared to Dhruva taking this session because, one is incredible record of excellency across the years from whether going to Harvard, being the part of Indian debating team in 2012-13, and the kind of best speakers over there, then going to Harvard, then going to Oxford, being PhD from there. He's currently a PhD candidate over there. And also he's running an organization which primarily create an ecosystem of giving, how to do the research for the high schoolers. So the best person that I think that our organization think of, someone taking how to actually do reading and research when you are thinking about any motion before preparing for it, while you are sort of as kind of impromptu, you have couple of hours. So with that, let me ask Dhruva to give some, initial words about him, how he started his journey, and then sort of over to him. Yes, Dhruva.
Thank you so much, Kamal, for that generous introduction. And good morning, everyone. I'm so excited to see all of you today and glad to hear that you're getting started on the debating journey. So let me tell you a little bit about my own debating journey. And I'm saying this mostly so that you all have a sense of why I'm here and what the point of this entire session is. So I grew up in Chennai. I spent the first 17 years of my life there. And actually from pre-KG till 12th standard, I went to the same school called PS Senior Secondary School, which was a CBSE school. And while growing up, I was doing well in classes. I enjoyed the work that I was asked to do, but I knew that I didn't really like engineering or medicine and the sciences, which of course came as a big shock to everybody because, when I was doing well in school, it was expected that I take C++ or biology and medicine as my stream for 11th and 12th. I ended up taking commerce because I was more interested in the social sciences and the economics, and I've moved forward in that, going on to study economics and then international development in my undergrad and now in my PhD. And a large part of what shaped that experience was debating. So I still remember that I had done other debating competitions. I'd done speeches, I'd done quizzes, I'd done drama competitions. But it was in the 8th standard when I was in Chennai at school that they told me that the coach of the Indian national debating team was going to come and do a session at my school. And of course, I was super excited by that prospect because I'd never met the coach of a national team before, certainly not in a field where I was interested in. So the coach came to our school and did, I think, about a half-day long session where they walked us through what is debate, how is it structured. They did activities where we got to deliver arguments and respond to other people. And it was the most fun that I'd had in my life. And I decided that I really wanted to continue doing this. And so I continued participating with the Indian Schools Debating Society. So I think some of you may have been at the MasterClass last time where Amrita Vashni spoke, who heads the Indian Schools Debating Society. I participated in the selections with them. They were hosting debating competitions and the selections for the national team. And I tried in the 8th grade, I tried in the 9th grade, and finally, in the 10th grade, I managed to make it to the national team, and I represented India at the World Schools Debating Championships in Scotland. We didn't do that well. We only won 5 out of the 8 preliminary rounds and didn't make it to the knockout rounds that time. But it just sort of inspired me to come back and try harder the next time. So in 2012, I made it back to the national team, representing the country at the World Championships in South Africa. And then following that, in 2013, I was also on the national team going to Turkey. And in both of those years, we made it successfully to the elimination rounds and ranked among the top 10 or 15 countries in the entire world. So that was an amazing experience, and being competitive at it, of course, was useful. But what I really enjoyed was the wide variety of topics that I was exposed to along the way, where I was debating questions about economics and political science and religion and culture and philosophy and history and education and all of these topics that the Indian education system was never exposing me to. And I found myself totally impressed and excited by the fact that I could spend my time reading up about these topics, thinking about them, discussing them with other really smart and talented people who cared about these topics as well. So that inspired me to apply abroad for undergrad, because I wanted to explore all of these different things. And at that time, Ashoka and other liberal arts universities didn't exist in India. And so I wanted to go abroad where I could do a mix and match of different subjects in a liberal arts system in the US. So I applied to the US, was lucky enough to get into Harvard University, where I studied economics. And I also continued debating there. So I was on the Harvard debating team, where I competed at the World Universities Debating Championships. So this is the World Championships for university students. I was president of the Harvard debate team, as well as worked with a number of younger students there in training and work and building them up. And by the end of those 4 years of undergrad, my two passions had become clear. I knew that I loved debating and wanted to continue doing it. But rather than continuing to compete as a debater myself, I now wanted to shift into coaching. So I decided to start coaching the Indian national team, and they graciously offered me a spot on the coaching team, and I became one of the coaches of the Indian national team. I also realized that I love doing research. All of those topics that I'd mentioned earlier, which I was interested by, I'd continued pursuing that through undergrad. And I found myself really excited by the idea that I could spend my time reading up about these topics, asking innovative questions, and trying to find out more about them. So to continue pursuing research, I decided that I would do a master's and then a PhD. And I was lucky enough to get to go to Oxford on the scholarship known as the Rhodes Scholarship, where I did a master's in international development, and I'm now currently doing a PhD, which means I'm writing a big 60,000, 80,000 word thesis on startup entrepreneurship as part of my PhD. And so that's one part of my life. And then in terms of coaching, throughout my master's and my PhD, I continued coaching the national team. In 2017, we made it to the quarterfinals of the World Schools Debating Championships for the first time. In 2018, we made it all the way to the finals, where we lost to China. And then in 2019, we finally won the World Championships, having the top speaker in the world and the top country in the world be India for the first time. So Indian school students have an incredible track record at the world level. And we are now looking to all of you as the next generation of Indian debaters to continue taking that tradition of success and excellence forward. And a really, really important part of that is making sure that you have the right knowledge and skills and research necessary in order to succeed. So I'm really excited about this opportunity that Kamal and the Ogly team have put together, because it gives me an opportunity to bring those two interests of mine together, research and debating, and being able to talk to all of you about that is something that I'm very, very excited about. So that's me. And I'm going to put up a presentation and walk you guys through it. And along the way, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I don't know if I'll be able to answer them as I go along, but I'll pause every now and then and try and take them as they come. Can I get a thumbs up if everyone's still with me? Great. Thank you, guys. Okay, let me, Kamal, could you get me to screen share?
Sure. Yes, there.
Great. Awesome. So let's talk about reading and research in debating. And I am super excited to be here talking about all of it. But before we go into it, I think we need to differentiate between two meanings of the term research. So when I say research for a debate, what does that mean? Can someone put it in the chat? What does research mean? Acquiring knowledge, getting information about a topic, finding something you don't know, finding something out about a topic, searching for relevant topics, having a search about known information. Absolutely. News, gathering information, perfect. Evidence from credible sources to support the topic. I think those are all perfect explanations for what we normally mean when we say doing research for a debate. And when we say doing research, it actually, what we're referring to is there is some information that is out there in the news or on Wikipedia, in books. And when we say doing research for a topic, for a debate, what we mean is getting that information and reading it and understanding it and remembering it. That's what we talk about. And usually we start with a Google search about the topic, read up a little bit about the topic, go on Wikipedia, read through the Wikipedia article, look for some trusted sources like BBC and so on. And all of those are ways that we try and acquire information. But here's a little secret, and this is something that actually most students your age don't know, that the word research actually means something else. If you go into a university, or if you go into the world outside and say, I'm going to do research, what that means in an academic context, so academic research, doesn't mean just taking information that somebody else has already found out and then reading up about it. Rather, it means creating new knowledge. So in reality, research is about doing an experiment to find out something new that nobody else knows before. It means looking through historical documents or policy documents of the government to try and create a new understanding of the world around us. It means doing interviews and surveys and case studies of other people to try and develop a new theory that hasn't been suggested before. Or it means using quantitative data, so using numbers and statistics and graphs to put forward a point that people haven't thought about before. That's what academic research actually is. It refers to creating new knowledge that didn't exist before. And that's something that actually high school students can do. And it's something that I'm working on helping high school students do, as Kamal mentioned. I run this program called the Lumiere Research Scholar Program, where students like yourselves who are in school or high school are matched one-on-one with a professor or a PhD mentor from a top university in the US or the UK, and where the student works on creating a new research project of their own, some type of new knowledge. But that is a lot harder and a lot different to what doing research for debate means. But I wanted to make sure that that distinction was very clear, because what we're going to be focusing on for this session is gathering information, whereas academic research is about creating new information. And we will return to that at the end. Is that clear, the difference between research as gathering information and research as creating information? I see Atar put a thumbs up. The rest of you, another thumbs up. Great. Awesome. Thanks, guys. Keeping that distinction in mind, let's talk about how you can most effectively gather information for debating. And this is really, really important. If you guys want to be good debaters, being aware about what's going on in the world is super important. And it's important for a couple of different reasons. The first is that some topics are very general topics, but it's still useful to have read a lot, because you can figure out, why is this motion being set? What has been happening in the world that has resulted in it being set? So for example, let's take this motion, which is when there's an economic crisis going on, government should withhold information that might damage the stock market. So that means if there's an economic crisis, then government should not reveal information that will scare people more. You could do this debate without knowing much about the world. You could say generally, people's jobs are very important. If the government reveals bad information, then people will lose their jobs. That'll hurt them. Therefore, the government shouldn't do this. That's fine. You can probably do a pretty decent speech just by talking about that. But if you want to really take your debating to the next level, if you want to compete at the national and world level, what you need to be able to do is say, what are the things that have happened recently in human history in the world, which is the result for this motion being set? And so, for example, you will remember that there's a COVID pandemic happening right now, which has caused a economic crisis in many parts of the world. You might remember the 2008 financial crisis, when the entire world's economy really struggled because of a number of bad decisions made by big banks and how governments have responded to it. And when you know those pieces of context, your ability to do this debate well just becomes so much bigger, because you're now able to draw on real world context. And that leads to the second point, which is, and then you can use the right examples. You can say, when this last happened in 2008, here's how governments responded, here's what happened, and here's why we need to change things up this time. And so being able to identify that context and use the right examples can really push your debating to the next level and make it a lot more effective than it would be otherwise. And that's true for all debates, whether it's the motion this House would ban zoos, or this House would require school uniforms. Having read up about real world examples and real world themes will make you much better able to debate those topics. But it doesn't stop there, because some debate competitions are really mean and really nuanced and will set you topics that require you to know knowledge. So from the World Championships, these are all motions that are from this year's World Championships in 2021. So this is topics that the Indian national team debated very recently and had to do well in. And so think about that third motion, which, I as a PhD student barely understand. This House believes that the African Union should attempt to contain Gulf influence in the Horn of Africa. You look at this motion and you're like, what is going on? What is the African Union? What is Gulf influence? Do they mean Gulf countries? Do they mean something else? What is the Horn of Africa? Is that a geographical region? And so these types of topics are becoming more and more common, where it's about a very niche area of the world or a very niche thing that's happening in society. And for these, you absolutely have no choice but to know about the world in order to be able to successfully debate these topics. So clearly, knowing what's going on in the world is crucial for you to be able to debate well. But how do you get that information? And I think that's a very, very fair question that I want to turn to now. Broadly speaking, I'd say there are three ways that you should be trying to acquire information. The first is ongoing, and this is an everyday practice where you are gathering information, you're learning more, you're becoming a smarter individual, things like reading the news. The second thing is you need to do focused reading, where you identify what are the things that I don't know that much about and go deep into reading up about those in specific. And finally, of course, if you have a debate topic that you don't understand, you will need to do research just for that topic. And that is a whole different ballgame. And in the rest of the time that we have today, I want to talk through each of these three different types of research and learning about the world for debating, and how you can most successfully do it such that you're setting yourself up to do well in debating competitions moving forward. So let's begin with the first one, which is ongoing and regular reading. How many of you read the news every day? Can I see a hands up? Okay, I see one hand. I see 7, 8, 9, 11, 12. That's going up. I love that. Kamal, I'm glad you read the news every day. I see one person saying only sports. That's a good start, but not enough. So let's put it to the test. Let's see if you guys actually read the news every day by seeing if you guys can identify some of the world's most well-known and most respected news organizations. So who knows? Let me, okay. Who knows which country this newspaper is based out of? This is an easy one. Put in the chat. Yep, the US. So the New York Times is one of America's most well-known newspapers, and it provides really useful context and analysis about American politics, economics, and so on, which of course has relevance for all sorts of things around the world and is really, really crucial. Where is this one located in? So the BBC is, of course, the UK's government-run news media. And they, I think, are really good because they provide a very unbiased, balanced perspective on a lot of different topics. And you guys should be looking at the BBC website almost every day to catch up on these news. The Financial Times, the FT, is also from the UK, and it is a much more economics focused magazine, which looks at financial markets, businesses, all of those things, which are quite hard topics and things that debaters need to know more about. Does anyone know where Al Jazeera is based out of? Awesome. I see a bunch of people give us the right answer. I certainly didn't know that in the 8th grade, so really good job. So Al Jazeera is a Qatari news organization, and they're really good because they provide a lot of analysis and reporting from the Middle East. So countries like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and this is a region that has a lot of political significance globally, and that you'll get a lot of debate topics about. So it's useful to be reading from this perspective as well, so that you know about the world more generally. And finally, has anyone heard of NPR? Does anyone know what NPR stands for? The US is right. Does anyone know what NPR stands for? National Public Radio is exactly right. So NPR is really good for analysis of culture, of social issues, of books and art. Those are all things that NPR does a lot of focus on, which I think provides for some really compelling and interesting news sources. So these are all things that you should be trying to look at every day. How do you do that? You obviously won't be able to read all of these in full detail every day. So it's good to pick one or two. So maybe you choose to read the New York Times and the Hindu every day. And I've left out the Indian ones from here because I think you guys are probably all familiar with the Indian sources of news, like scroll.in or the Wire and the Hindu. So pick a couple of them and make sure to read them every day. The best way of doing this is for those of you who have smartphones to download their apps onto your phone. And think about it as something that you could be doing when you're waiting for a cab to arrive or waiting for lunch to arrive at a restaurant. You could just pull out your phone and look through these apps. And as you do it more and more, you'll start to find yourself really interested in them. You can also follow these on social media. So most news organizations now have Instagram accounts. All of them will have Twitter accounts. And so you could create an account on one of these social media profiles and follow all of them so that you get at least the breaking news alerts on your phone as you're on social media. So that way you can't escape it. I know you all spend a lot of time on Instagram. So imagine if in between all of the reels and the memes, you also got a bit of news in there, which helps you understand the world better. That can be a really quick way of getting access to this information. So that's daily reading. The other thing you should be thinking about doing is weekly reading. And the reason that this is important is because these tend to be a little bit more in detail. And the daily reading is usually just, here are the facts. Here's what happened in Afghanistan. Here's an update on what the US is doing with respect to its pullout of Afghanistan. The weekly magazines in comparison go into a bit more detail. They say, let's talk about the historical instances where countries have invaded another country and then come out of it. Let's talk about the political climate in different countries in Asia and how they compare to each other. And those are really in-depth and well-developed points of view that can be enormously helpful in helping you when next time one of these debates come up to be able to draw on those arguments and draw on that analysis to deliver your own thoughts. So two really good ones are this one, which is The Economist, which even though it's called The Economist, is actually not just for economics. It's one of the best and most comprehensive magazines that reviews what's happened in a week and provides analysis. And it's something that I started reading when I was in the 9th grade. So it's definitely accessible to high school students, even though it's hard to begin with. And so that's one I really recommend as a way to grow your knowledge in different subjects. You could also consider others which are in specific areas. So does anyone know what FP stands for? It's a very, very popular magazine. Kevin says IR. That's right. But what is what's the full name of this magazine? Does anyone know? Foreign Policy, exactly. So Foreign Policy is a magazine that talks about international relations issues, about terrorism and countries engaging with each other, and all of those, the UN and all of these things that are relevant in how countries engage and negotiate with each other. So that's the sort of thing that I think can help you get a deeper knowledge in a particular area. These are things you might want to read every week. So setting aside some time on your Saturday or Sunday to try and read The Economist, or saying I'm going to spend an hour every morning reading through The Economist on my way to school. Those are all things that over the course of the week can help you develop your knowledge and understand things a lot more. The third thing you could be reading regularly are some of these newfangled online things that didn't exist when I was younger, but are becoming a lot more popular now. So for example, blogs like Slate Star Codex, which you can look up, are really, really interesting perspectives that you might not get through mainstream news media, that offer alternative ways of looking at things, really interesting arguments that may have not been made before, that you're able to draw on for your own debating as well. And finally, podcasts like the New York Times' The Daily, which is a daily podcast where they update you in 5 or 10 minutes on the big news topics of the day, or more in-depth ones like Dan Carlin's Hardcore History, which is a podcast where they go in depth into a historical issue, are things that you can just put in your ears as you work out, or as you fold your clothes or do your laundry, all of these things that I hope that you're doing and that you can have running in the background as you work on these different things. So those are a slightly less intensive and a bit more engaging and fun ways of accessing information. And then finally, of course, you have the classics. I would be remiss to do a slide on regular reading habits without talking about books. And I know that books seem really long, and I know books seem really intensive, but actually once you start reading them, you'll find that they're a lot more interesting than you give them credit for. It just takes a bit of, forcing yourself to sit down and get over that initial bump of the first 15 minutes, and then you'd find yourself engaged with them. And these are just 3 books that I've read recently, which have really informed my debating. So the first one is by this professor at Harvard named Michael Sandel, called The Tyranny of Merit. It's about how when we talk about whether someone deserves success or not, we focus too much on the qualities that they have and not enough on the role of luck that is played in someone becoming successful. Invisible Women is about how technology companies and the data that we collect ignores or overlooks women in so many different ways, ranging from the fact that phones are generally made to be too large for women's hands, all the way to cars not being tested for the safety of women, and the assumption being that airbags in cars, for example, will protect men because of their size, but not women because they're smaller, and it's just never been tested on female students. Ants Among Elephants is another book that I'm reading right now, which is about caste in India, and it's about the history of this one family in Andhra Pradesh and how they were discriminated against and the experiences that they had running into today's times as well. So those are all great books, and I just use them as an example to show you they cover so many diverse topics and areas and ideas that just reading these things regularly, even if you don't fully understand them, even if you don't complete them, can really kickstart your thinking and your knowledge so much. And it's something I'd recommend that you all do. Sanchit makes a good point in the message that he sent out as well, which is it doesn't just have to be nonfiction. Even fiction books like The Kite Runner, which is by Khalid Hosseini and is about Afghanistan and this particular community known as the Hazaras, can be very informative. Though I would push you to go beyond that and say, okay, fiction is useful, but it's not the be all and end all. Try and pick up a nonfiction book and read it as well. And you might just surprise yourself by how interesting you find it. Great, so that was a lot. And this was just the daily, weekly things that you need to be doing. in order, if you are thinking seriously about competing for the Indian national team, if you want to win the Indian Debate League, these are the things that you should be doing on a regular basis. And I know that all of you are going to come back to me and say, I have school, I have homework, I have exams, but I promise you that if you choose to prioritize this, you can find the time needed to do this. So if you say, you know, I'm going to spend an hour a day on this, I'm going to spend 2 hours a day on weekends on this, I'm going to spend the idle time that I have when I'm sitting in a cab or waiting for lunch, or when I am, you know, just on Instagram doing other things, and I'm going to reroute some of that time and energy into doing these things, I promise you that there's no 8th grader or 11th grader in the entire world who doesn't have a bit of spare time that they can free up to do these things. I got the question, are storybooks useful for debating? That's what we were talking about with fiction, like The Kite Runner, for example. It can help a little bit. It's definitely better than not reading, but I would push you to go beyond just fiction and read the news and read nonfiction books as well. I love fiction. I prefer fiction to nonfiction, but I also know that it's important to be reading about factual things out in the world, and nonfiction books can help you achieve that. Great. So this is general news, general reading that I think you all should be doing on a regular basis. Let's now switch tracks a little bit and talk about the more focused things you could be doing for debate in specific. Now, clear that. Annotations and move into the next one. The second type of research you want to do is focused research, where you think about the world, right? And you say, okay, I know a little bit about politics. I know a little bit about religion, but I don't know that much about economics, or I don't know that much about history of countries other than India. And you identify 4 or 5 weakness areas like this that you think are important for you to learn more about. And then you create what's called a matter file. And this is a secret that, you know, the top debaters in across the world at Harvard, at Oxford, at the University of Sydney are all doing, which is creating a matter file. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a document that has information in it that is relevant to debating. And the way you create that is you identify your weakness areas where you don't know that much about. You figure out a timeline and say, okay, from the next 2 weeks, I'm going to focus on feminism and reading about feminism. The 2 weeks after that, I'm going to focus on international relations and the UN. The 2 weeks after that, I'm going to focus on history of World War II. And then you dive into those topics and read as much as you can and as widely as you can. You start with Wikipedia and reading what's on the Wikipedia page about it. Then you read more news articles about it. You read academic articles about it. You listen to podcasts about it. And all the while, and this is super, super important for this to be successful, you're taking notes. You're not just reading the way you read the news, which is, you know, you scroll on it on your phone or listen to it while you're doing something else. Now, this time around, you're listening with focus and you're taking notes on your laptop about everything that you're listening to. And the reason you want that is because the last step is, after you've done the reading, you want to structure your matter file in a way that's useful for you in the future. So you make nice sections which says the United Nations, and under that you have sections which goes history of the United Nations, the different organs of the United Nations, big controversies that the United Nations has been involved in recently. And you're not just copy pasting information, you're writing things in your own words, so that in the future, you can draw on this information for debates that are going to come, not just in the rest of high school, but even in college and beyond. I look back at the matter files that I made in school, and I still use them, and I still find them really interesting to read through when I need access to information for debating. And when you're writing these, also be actively thinking and critically thinking about, what are some debates where I can use this? Okay, I'm writing down this information about Christianity. I can use it in a debate about how governments should approach religions. I can use it in a debate about whether or not children should be religious. So thinking, okay, here's this information. What are the debate topics that I can associate them with? Will then make sure that your brain is thinking on debating lines and able to draw those connections quickly when a motion presents itself to you. Great. So this is how you create a matter file. I realized that I was breaking for some of it. Is there anything in particular that you missed, or did you guys hear all of that?
It was good. There was a bit of break in between.
Okay. Where in particular? Is there anything that I should repeat?
I guess if you just repeat last three, 2 to 3 minutes, that will be great.
Great. So matter file is identify weakness areas in information, structure your time, read, take notes, and then structure the notes in a clear way where you are writing it in your own words and thinking about how you can connect the information that you're reading to debates or topics that you may have seen all around. Pretty simple. Perfect. The final thing that final type of research that you might want to do for debates is specific motions that you get. So you may have a competition where they give you a motion that you just don't understand and that you need to prepare on. You may receive a topic for an oratory competition that you need to do research on. And there, what you do is, the first thing you do is you read through that motion and underline all the words which might require clarification. What are the words that you don't understand? What are the words that other people may be confused by? And once you've underlined those words, you look those words up. You see, what does Wikipedia say about them? What does the BBC say about them? And then you dive deeper into reading about that topic more generally. The important things to ask yourself are, what has happened in the world that has caused this motion to be set? What's in the news? What are the big world events that has resulted in this motion becoming a topical and relevant motion to be set at this point? Second, you want to ask, what are the strongest examples for proposition? What are the strongest examples for opposition? And you might realize that one side has more examples than the other, or you might realize that that same example could be used on both sides in different ways. And noting all of that down is really important. The third thing you do is the fourth thing you do is see if there are any numbers or statistics. So is there any like percentage of people who support a particular policy, or a number of people who are affected by a particular problem that you can talk about in order to make the importance of this topic really, really clear. And then finally, once you figure this out for proposition and opposition, you need to do the sneaky thing where you say, okay, if I were on the other side, how will I respond to this example? How will I respond to this statistic? And make sure that you have thought through that as well. And if you do all of this using the types of sources that we've talked about earlier, news sources, books, the magazines, as well as podcasts and blogs, you will be able to put together a really strong set of examples and facts for your case that can then support and help your arguments really effectively. So to recap then, research and reading are super important for debating. They help you identify what the context of a debate is. They help you identify the right examples. And of course, for motions that are very, very knowledge heavy, allow you to even debate them in the first place. There's many different ways that you can build your knowledge for debates. The first is through regular reading of newspapers, of blogs, of magazines, as well as of books. The second thing is you could do focused reading on identifying specific things that you want to learn more about and reading up about them. And then finally, you'll of course have to do research for specific motions that you get at competitions, for which you want to ask the questions that you see on this slide and make sure to answer them before the competition starts. I'll pause here for a few minutes and answer questions you guys have about doing research for debating. And then finally, I want to spend a few minutes at the end talking about that other kind of research, which is not about gathering information, which is what we've talked about so far, but rather about creating information and how you might be able to do that at the school level. So let's pause the slides at this point, and I'll return to them in a couple of minutes. But hit me with your questions about research. Kamal, there's a question from Aditi that she's asked 3 times, which I think you might need to answer, which is, Will these students be debating both sides of a given topic or only one side of it?
Only one side, I guess. Question related to the Indian Debating League, we will take it. Like, we are there, we are doing it on a daily basis. So don't worry about it. Let's stick to the topic, which is reading and research in the context of debating.
Yeah, and so I think the question, which is, should you get information for both sides, is very fair. You should be trying to get information for both for and against. If you're on one side, you want information for your own side so that you can use it effectively in your speeches. But you will want information for the other side so that you can be prepared for it when the other side uses that information. So to be able to say, that information is actually wrong, here's the counter example, here's what they've missed. And so it's important to know what the other side is going to be saying as well.
Should I pick the question for you?
That'd be really useful, yeah.
Okay, cool. Sure, let me do that. So one has a question around like how we incorporate statistics in the speeches, and what is the relevance, what is the significance that they have?
That's a really good question. So in general, in the types of debates that you guys are doing, statistics can't by themselves win you a point or a debate. And the reason is because you can make up these statistics and no one will be able to call you out, because at the end of the day, debate is a spoken activity. It's not like anyone is looking this up online and making sure that you're providing correct information. And so what that means is statistics should be used to support a logical argument that you're making. So you're basically basing your argument on logic and clear steps of analysis. And then the statistic or example that you give at the end is just a way of saying, look, here's one more way of showing that this is right. Here's a real world proof that it's right, rather than basing your entire argument just on that statistic or that example. It helps to mention where the statistic is from, but in general, you don't want to go into detail of saying, oh, according to Harvard University's 2017 study led by professors Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, here's what it says. You don't need to go into that level of detail. You can just say a study of over 1,000 people showed that X, and that should be plenty.
Okay, Dhruva, it's a question, but obviously I'm picking it a different way. So we are looking at debating at SDGs. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, we are not debating SDGs. The idea is to debate, how a government is approaching SDGs. Should they prioritize one over the another, the way they are taking about it? So, for example, say climate change or say zero hunger. Then we had one motion. The motion was that this house would increase the taxes to support hunger elimination programs. Now how someone on the opponent side will divide these kind of issues, which seems morally to be on the on the favorable side?
That's a good question, and I think those kinds of counterintuitive topics. So counterintuitive means against what you might believe at first glance, are topics where it's really important to read up more. And there you might want to focus on reading not necessarily just the factual examples like news articles, but reading the analysis pieces that these longer magazines or blogs might post, so that you can find people who are proposing these alternative views and understand those views in greater detail. And maybe they have different ways of thinking about it, or different things you may not have thought about, different groups of people that might be affected by this topic that you had not realized. And bringing all of those in can be really useful as a way to defend the side of a topic that you might at first glance go, how is that even possible to support?
Okay, I guess that's very helpful. And related to this question, the idea is that you mentioned about one, in general reading that we should do while, walking to the school or doing anything else. And then you mentioned about focus reading. When we have a motion one day prior, then we have to go it. The one who are focused, correct. Obviously, it's can we go, bit deeper into it? So for example, if we receive a motion, so how should we go about it? Should we look out the major argument and just try to copycat them?
Yeah.
Where our creativity comes over there, because all the major issues, obviously there are going to be very specific issues, but in general the issues will be there which already exist somewhere in the world. So should we rely on arguments which are primarily there in the world, and maybe just sort of we are doing a job of a compilation from here and there, or is it like we are really looking towards going and creating an argument top of another
Yeah.
argument, because the major argument, the substantive argument, I think would have been made by someone else already in the newspaper somewhere in the world.
Mm.
So how
Yeah,
to go about that?
I think it's what's called an iterative process. And iterative just means you do something else, and you go back to the first thing, then you go back, and so on and so forth. And what I mean by that is, let's say you get a topic and the topic has words in it that you don't understand or things you know nothing about. Then maybe starting with your own brain is not the most useful place. You might want to spend a little bit of time reading up about it. But once you've read about it a little bit, you then want to spend some time yourself reflecting on what you have read and organizing the material and saying, okay, here is the set of economic arguments, here's the set of political arguments, here's the set of cultural arguments. Or you might want to divide it up and say, okay, here is the principle or philosophical argument, and here is the practical argument. And once you've done that, you might realize there are still things that you don't know, still things that you're unclear about. So you go back to the drawing table and read up more about those specific things, and you use that. In terms of, and so that's what I mean by an iterative process, is that you read, you think, structure, then read again, then come back to it. Along the way, you might find that other people have made arguments that are really strong, and you should absolutely take those and use those in your debates. But very rarely will it be sort of cut and paste, because you will still need to figure out, okay, this particular motion is phrased in a certain way, worded in a certain way, set in a particular context. Or you might have different arguments, and taking one argument from one place and another argument from another place might not work exactly right, because those two arguments might contradict themselves. So you have to be thoughtful and careful about how you're taking in information from other places. But please feel free, if other people have made good arguments, to adopt them and use them, because that'll strengthen your own knowledge and skills a lot.
Okay. There is one question, obviously, so that, even with the ISDS, there are two kind of debates. One, you have the motion 1 day prior, 2 day prior. So you have, time to devote this. Then you have motions coming just 14 minutes, 45 minutes prior. How to
Yeah.
think about those? Those where you have very, very limited time, correct? It seems
Yeah.
very, on the fly,
So
extemporary kind of thing. How to go about them?
So at the World Schools Debating Championships, and I think IDL's rules you might have to clarify, Kamal. At the World Championships, there are two types of topics. One is prepared motions, which are released far in advance. So it'll be released weeks in advance. And for that, you have a lot of time to think through. You will even write up the speeches, you'll practice the speech, you'll see what is missing, add more to it, and so on and so forth. So for those, you can take the luxurious, long time that's needed to read and reflect and read and change and so on. Then you have what's called impromptu debates, where the motion is only released 1 hour before the debate starts. And actually, for those topics at WSDC, at the World Championships, you're not allowed to use the internet. You're not allowed to do any new research. You have to only use the knowledge that is already in your brain and in the book that you brought with you. And so what that means is, that's why the general reading becomes so important, because suppose a motion drops and you have an hour to think through it. You've got to draw on all of these things that you've read in the past and use all of that as a way to develop this case and the arguments for this particular topic. So you can't depend on always having access to the internet, because many formats don't allow you to have access to the internet.
Okay, I guess just for clarification, this question was not related to Indian Debating League, because we have Dhruva sir with us. So we are answering all sort of questions. In Indian Debating League, you will get the motion 1 day prior in the round 1, and round 2 onwards you will see. So it's primarily in the context of the student asking if they are debating not just Indian Debating League, but across their schools, ISDS. Yes, with that, let me ask actually a student to come and ask their question. That will be much more powerful, energetic to see their voices. With Arnav Jha, why don't you go? Okay, if Arnav is not able to speak, let's go with Ayan Srinivasan. Ayan?
Yes, sir. So actually, my doubt was that when we are researching, so like the sites that you just told, for example, FP and the Daily, etc. Hello.
Yeah, we can
Yeah.
hear you.
Yeah. When we research about them, what we don't find something we exactly need. Like, for example, actually the Slate codex I actually searched. I couldn't find exactly what I needed, like how to zoom in a topic about.
Yeah, so there's two things there. One is search harder. I'm sure that if you keep looking at more websites and more sources of information, you might find something that helps. And the second is to be creative, which is if the motion is about a particular policy in a particular country and you can't find any information about that policy in that country, that's okay. Maybe you can look for if that policy has been done in other countries, or you can look to see if a similar policy has been done in that particular country. You might look at associated themes and topics that are related to it, but not directly what the motion talks about. And read up and use all of those as a way to develop your knowledge and use in the debate. So I'd say be creative and think about what are parallels you can draw, what are other examples you can use, and so on.
Okay, I guess we have a very specific question. Pradyuman Nahata, you have written down, but ask it verbally. That would be great. Pradyuman,
Yeah,
go on.
sure. So I was basically asking, most seasoned debaters say that the research should actually precede the formation of your argument. So you don't double speak. You don't use research to justify confirmation bias, right? But for principally based debates, which call for principled arguments about morality, how do you go about your research then?
Yeah, give me just 1 second. Let me answer that in.
Otherwise, others can put their questions in the chat, and I will pick one by one. Sorry, it's just joining us back. And related to the Indian Debating League, Karnataka state has already received all the details for 13th and the 14th matches. And if they have questions, so one question that I keep repeating is this house is going to be in the context of India or not? Yes, that's true. It's going to be in the context of India primarily. So the round one is focused around India's implementation of SDGs. Any other question that you have till the time sir joins back related to the Indian Debating League, I'm happy to take. When you will send the topic for the competition. So for the Karnataka team, it will be, if they are Monday, so you will receive the motion by tomorrow for 13th. For others who have debate from 14th and onward, you will receive the email today. What about the DPS? It's about state, we are sending out the emailers through the state level thing. Karnataka going first, and then sort of Chhattisgarh, Bihar, and all. So we have with us Dhruva sir back. Yes.
Hi, I'm back. Sorry about that. I think that's a really good question. So first of all, on the first part of your question, which is should you read before thinking about the topic or not? I think you can read first and then think, or if you're able to understand the motion as soon as you receive it, you can begin with just thinking about the motion directly and then use that as the basis from which to read. So I think either of those processes is okay. It depends on whether you understand the motion or not. The second part of it, which is there are some topics which are philosophical. Those actually, you could probably, there's two things. If there's a philosophical motion, like this house believes that it is immoral to lie, you will be able to find a lot of articles and arguments online which argue both sides of that, because those are things that people already have a perspective on that they have written about. Maybe not in these exact places, but on other sources online as well. And the second thing is even those sort of philosophical debates tend to have a practical aspect to it as well. So if you say it's immoral to lie, maybe you want to draw on examples of when leaders have to lie in order to protect the population. Maybe you want to draw on examples of when someone lied in the past and something horrific happened. So being able to draw on real life examples is useful even in that situation. So that's a great question. I just want to, I know I promised you guys a final bit on the other type of research. So I want to share screen once again and just walk you through that, and then probably take one or two questions at the end. So let's say you do all of this information collecting type of research, right? Where you're gathering information, learning about things that's out in the world, and you find yourself interested by a particular topic. You find yourself drawn to religion over and over again, or you find yourself drawn to economics over and over again. That's a really good sign that maybe that's a passion that you're developing or a talent you're developing, and that you want to develop and grow that more through doing academic research of your own, where you are creating information of your own kind. And so that's the sort of thing where you might then say, okay, what's a new question that no one seems to have answered before? What's a tool that I can use, like data analysis, that I can learn about and develop in order to be able to write an academic article of my own? And I think this can be one of the most valuable things you do in high school, because when you're applying to universities, when you're applying to internships, when you're applying to jobs, academic research can be such a fantastic way of showing that you're academically and intellectually really strong, so that, you know, thousands and thousands of students apply to Harvard and Oxford every year for history, but only a few of them will be able to say, here's a research article or paper that I have written for it. The second thing is you usually do academic research with a mentor, and certainly as part of a Lumiere program, you'd be doing it with the mentor. And that's someone that you can look to for inspiration, for support, for advice, and even for recommendation letters down the line. And finally, it develops a whole bunch of skills. You learn how to manage your time. You learn how to overcome failure, because when you're, unlike the gathering information type of research, the type of research where you're creating information is really, really hard, and you will encounter mistakes and failure and figure out how to get over them. All of those can be super useful when you're thinking about your next steps, when you're applying to university, when you're applying to master's degrees and so on, because these are all characteristics and values that universities are looking for in your application essays, in your interviews, in your recommendation letters. And so that's just my final thing that I wanted to leave you with, was research in terms of gathering information, reading and knowing about the world can revolutionize your debating. But academic research in terms of trying to do something new of your own can revolutionize your life. And so that's why I've spent so much of my time, you know, doing a master's degree and then a PhD, setting up a research program for high school students. And so that's something I'm really passionate about. And I wanted to make sure to leave you with that pitch so that you know about both types of research and that you can do them both as high school students.
I guess it's quite incredible what you're doing, and surely I see a lot of students applying for it. Considering, you know, one, debating give them idea of exposure that what kind of research others are doing, so they can sort of also contribute to the wider, you know, knowledge area that coming. That will be great, and we will be looking out to circulating those messages, you know, in our community of at least the Indian Debating League. So we can take 1 to 2 more questions because we are running short of the time. We have other debating sessions. So I'm just going with one. Amudha, you gonna go?
So we have a question from Kshitij as well. So I'll answer Amudha and Kshitij, and then we'll conclude.
Sure. Amudha, you go, then we'll take Kshitij.
Yeah. So I just wanted to ask, it's at first a pleasure being in your class, sir. And so usually people ask, I don't have any information. This is an impromptu debate. But now I'm saying I have too much information. I really like this topic. How do I keep it short and crisp?
I love that. That's a great problem to have, first of all. And what you need to do is 2 things. The first is you need to go through the various different types of information you have and identify which ones are the most relevant. So you might have 5 examples, but you need to pick the top 2 examples to put in your speech, and do that quickly by saying which is the most impactful, which is the one that the other side will find it the hardest to challenge. And remember that you can, if it's a team-based format like WSDC is, you can give the other examples to your teammates. So you don't have to hog all the examples yourself. You can say, okay, I'll take the top 2 examples, you take the next 2 examples, and so on. The next step after that is to figure out how to communicate that information as effectively as possible. So you want to take the example that you have, take all the information that you know about it, and then condense it into a clear, logical, snappy set of sentences that explains the context to that example and why it's important, so that, and its relevance to the debate, so that the judges on the other side are convinced. That's a lot harder and takes a lot of practice, but that's what you get by doing debate after debate after debate. But that's a great question, Amita. Kshitij, final question? You want to unmute yourself and ask?
Yes, sir. I would just like to ask, like, if you collect information on a particular topic, like, how do you differentiate for or against? Like, you get a for, then how do you take for information from that particular information?
I think that's a good question. And the first answer is that a lot of information can be used on both sides, and it depends on how you present it and what factors you emphasize on when you are doing it. So that's the first thing to make sure that you're aware of is you should be thinking for every example, for every statistic, how will I be able to use it from prop and how will I be able to use it from op as well? But that said, there are some examples that will lend themselves more directly to one side over the other. And so for that, what you need to do is think about it from very strategically, which is what are the points that I need to prove on this side in order to win? What are the facts that I need to establish in order to make my case strongly? And then find those examples that are in line with that. So the way that you identify whether an example is better for prop or op is to say, what do I need to prove to win? Let's forget about these examples. Let's forget about these statistics. What is this debate about? What are the big themes that this debate is about? And then use that as the starting point to figure out how you will spin it on that side. Does that help? Fantastic. Well, thank you guys all so much. I think it was amazing to see the kinds of questions you had and the engagement. I think I've had very few sessions where there were 70 people at the beginning and 70 people at the end. So I hope part of that was because I'm interesting and that was useful, but really it speaks to the sort of commitment that all of you have to debate and the commitment you all have to improving your knowledge and improving your debating. I really hope you take some of this to heart. I genuinely think that reading more widely is the #1 thing that can improve your debating. And so even if that's just starting off by reading the news tomorrow, or actually why wait till tomorrow, starting to read the news today, downloading these apps onto your phone, getting a subscription to The Economist, starting to make a list of areas that you want to improve on, I hope that that can become the start of a lifelong engagement with reading and research, which hopefully in the future develops into academic research as well. And if that's something you're interested in, please do check out the website that I put in the chat. But otherwise, it was such a pleasure speaking to all of you, and Kamal, back to you.
Thank you, Dhruva. Thank a lot for joining us today. I guess it's a wonderful session, as you mentioned, starting from 70. Now we have 73. It's the other way around. Students are increasing and they sort of love your presentation, especially both the difference that you make out clearly, one helping on debating, one in the real world, and how your organization and our organization helping us them. That's wonderful. And to everyone, just last, so we will wrapping the session. The sir is also the adjudicator to Indian Debating League, and we will be seeing the sir in the finals and the semi-finals. So with that, let's wrap up the session. We will be doing the next session tomorrow with Harish Natarajan. That's the final session, and 13th we are starting the Indian Debating League matches. Okay, thank you everyone. Thank you, Dhruva, for joining us.
Thank you guys. See you.
Thank you.